February 11th, 2023, I embarked a journey of a lifetime. I started at Amicalola Falls, Georgia, and started hiking to Springer Mountain, Georgia, to hike the Appalachian Trail. This was the start of an adventure that would forever change my life. Starting in Georgia in February, when it started, it wasn't all that bad cold. There was some cold days, but it wasn't all that bad cold. February was a good month. Did have some rain and did have some snow flurries at the higher elevations, but the weather-wise in Georgia, it was not all that bad. Now, like I say, I was 280 pounds, and I had been walking, and exercising and stuff, and I had dropped a little bit of weight, but I had, was trying not to drop too much or anything like that, because I knew that I would have weight loss along the way. But Georgia is tough. You've got a lot of mountain climbs through there and a lot of ups and downs, and you're starting to get used to this is what I'm going to be doing for the next 6 months. So you're getting used to the ups and downs and the weather changes and all the terrain that Georgia has to offer. And it's, you're starting to get your gear worked out. Is this going to work for my trip or is it not? So as you're going along in Georgia, you're making the decision, is this something that is going to work for me, or is this something that I'm going to have to send home? After I did go into Hiwassee, Georgia, just because Mouse in one of the shelters did get a hold of a couple of my gear items, a couple of my clothing bits, and gnawed a hole in them. So I ended up going into Hiwassee because I didn't have a sewing kit. So I got a sewing kit at the CVS and was able to get that sewed up. When I come back to the trail from Hiwassee, you hike over Tray Mountain, and then I know I got to Addison Gap, and that's when I first met Kodak. She was camped there, so there's a storm coming up that night, and as I said, you mind if I stay here too, because I knew I wouldn't make it to the next shelter, and you had to climb Kelly Knob the next day, and I literally hate climbing that thing. So I had done it before in the past, and I knew what was to come. So anyway, so I stayed there that night. It did rain hard that night. Some thunderstorms come through and some hard rains. Got out the next day, left from there, and I made it to Bly Gap the next day, which is the North Carolina-Georgia line. That was a feat in itself. Of course, before that you go through Neal's Gap, which is across Blood Mountain and in the Neal's Gap and everything. So now going in the Blood Mountain, Neal's Gap, you're only about 30 miles in. Blood Mountain I didn't think was all that bad, but then went in Neal's Gap, did get resupply some pizza and charge my phone and stuff like that, and talked with a couple people there. That's the first time that I had met Caps before then, but that's the first time that I actually talked to him, and that's where Seth, he had got off trail and went home for a couple days because he had hiked a section. But when I got to Bly Gap, North Carolina line. It was in the evening, and I went to the top. I didn't want to set up in the gap, but the only place there was a set up was on an old logging road out. So I kind of got over there and deflected myself from the wind. I'm glad that I did, because it howled all night long, and it was just cold. The temperature dropped, and it had snowed. I remember when I was trying to put my tarp up, it's like the dampness from the night before, the water, it just like automatically froze on the tarp, and trying to get it set up and the lines set on it was very hard. But I did get it set, and I slept well. I did see a guy, he went on across and ended up sleeping on one of the ledges on up from Bly Gap, and he said his tent was laid over on top of him all night. He said he was cold. But anyway, I guess that was really the first taste of bad weather that I got. Now, hiking out of Bly Gap the next day, it was gorgeous. It was just real gorgeous and everything. Pretty scenery. Just clear weather. You couldn't ask for no better. Got 100 miles at Albert Mountain and Albert Fire Tire and all that. Gorgeous views that day. Felt exhilarating. I was knocking down the miles. Felt really good about myself. Walked from there. I ended up camping at Wallace Gap, and Kodak, she camped at the Gap also. She was going to go into Franklin the same time I was. But anyway, I camped. I didn't have a good place to set up my hammock there, so the wind blowing through. I ended up sleeping on my mat, my sleep mat inside my hammock, because my underquilt just wasn't able to keep up with all the wind and everything, keeping the heat. But I stayed warm once I got that mat blowed up and everything. The next day, went into Franklin, resupplied, and then the following day ended up walking out of Franklin and just, making my way over toward the NOC. Saw beautiful views between, Franklin and NOC. You couldn't ask for no better weather going through there, going along by Bald Tower and the jump off and all that. So it was just gorgeous. Now, when I did get down to the NOC, I did get a room there. Now, I call that a bed in a broom closet. All it was a bunk in a broom closet. Now, like I say, I was glad to have a place to stay at, because it was going to be raining that night. Now, my wife and her Uncle Danny, one of my good friends, they came up and ate supper. We ate supper at the River's End restaurant, and Kodak was there, and a dumpling, and Kurt and Jason, all of them, was all, I guess, kind of in the same bubble, hiking through there. I had a real good time. Now, the next morning, did hike out in the fog and everything, and went up to the Bald and walked across that. Didn't really get no good views, just kind of walked. Now, did end up going all the way, and once we left NOC, walked all the way over to the Jacob's Ladder, which that was a hard day. It was a hard day going through there, just as one of the higher mileage days that I had done, and ended up stealth camping just about at the foot of the Jacob's Ladder. Kept on trucking, the next day ended up making it over to the Fontana Lake, and that's the first time that I met 109 and Opie, and stayed at the Fontana Hilton that night, and met Blackbeard, Serendipity, Bad Bat, and a couple of them. But anyway, then once I left the Hilton, I ended up staying at the Fontana Lodge just for a night, and because I was waiting on Seth, he was going to hike through the Smokies with me and make his trek north. We left out of the Fontana Lodge the following day and started our track on the Smokies. I met the other Seth, and I hiked with two Seths going through the Smokies. So when we did start in the Smokies, it was rainy. The first half of the Smokies didn't really get no views. It was rainy. I know we ended up staying at the one of the shelters going through there the first night, and it rained. And then the second day they was calling for some hard rains, and I think we only made it about 9 miles. Got the Derrick Knob shelter, and we had about 12, 14, 16 people crammed in that shelter for about 16 hours. I think that's the most miserable shelter stay that I have ever been in, just because you was crammed in that tight little space. But I mean, it poured the rain. But after that, the next day, went on across, climbed Klingman's Dome, which was just awesome. Got really good views up there, and stayed at the shelter right below Klingman's Dome, and then trucked on. Got my first real trail magic at Newfound Gap. Woodchuck, she was giving out trail magic, and that just brightened my spirits. Got a Mountain Dew, and I was ready to roll on. Now, the second half of the Smokies was beautiful. Had rain a few times, but not all that many. I know we stayed with some college kids at Peck's Corner, I think, and I don't think they was too thrilled at having us camping in the shelter with them, but I know they went down. They was reading some books and all that down by the water source. I told them they was having a seance down there because they had their little lights all around it and everything else. They was reading like vampire books and stuff, but it was a truly remarkable experience. After we left out of the Peck's Corner, left from there, I did go to see the Mount Kramer fire tower. It was a beautiful day. Beautiful views. Gorgeous day to be out. It's a little windy up there on the tower, but real gorgeous day. Hiked down to I-40. Caps, he was trying to cross the stream without his feet getting wet, and ended up falling plumb into it and getting his whole body wet. But that was a laugh we had for the day. And then we ended up meeting my wife down at the road, and she took us to Newport, Tennessee for resupply. After Amanda picked us up, she took us to Newport, Tennessee, and we ended up staying in a hotel there, and I ate at a really good restaurant called the Grease Rack. Man, they knowed how to throw down a steak, that's for sure. Anyway, it actually used to be a old gas station that they had converted over to a restaurant back in the probably 40s, 50s, or 60s. After she dropped us back on the trail, we was trying nothing against Standing Bear or anything like that. We was just trying to get a decent resupply for the next trek over to Hot Springs. So we chose not to go into Standing Bear or anything like that. We hiked over from 40 and started making our way over toward Hot Springs. Met Appalachian Al. He was the chaplain for the AT this year. Really great man. Enjoyed hiking with him for the time that I did get to hike with him. Anyway, met some colorful people through that section, but it was a really fun section to do. Went across Snowbird Mountain. At the time, you had that Chinese weather balloon that had come over, and everybody So I kind of the FAA thing on Snowbird Mountain, I just kind of joked that was the Chinese weather balloon watching station. But anyway, after that, you know, you go across Max Patch, which we hit on a gorgeous day. Got 360 panorama across Max Patch. Had a real good walk into there. Now, sadly, before we got to Davenport Gap, Seth, he got off at Newfound Gap. His knee was giving him some trouble and everything. So then Seth, Caps, and Kodak, we hiked on the hot springs, the other Seth. So then we hiked across Max Patch and through there, had gorgeous weather, and ended up staying at the Laughing Heart Hostel in Hot Springs, which had a really good stay there. Hot Springs is a beautiful town, good trail town. My rain gear hadn't been working up to par by then through the Smokies and everything. I had tried a Columbia jacket and it didn't work, and I tried a North Face jacket and it wasn't working. So when I got to Hot Springs, I ended up sending those back home and getting a Frog Togs suit. And so I packed it, you know, bought it, and we ended up eating at a couple of the restaurants in town, the Smoky Mountain Diner being my favorite. They know how to throw down breakfast. But anyway, great stay. We left out of Hot Springs, and of course you have to go across Lover's Leap up by the French Broad River and everything. So got some beautiful views up there. Climbed out of Hot Springs, went by a gorgeous pond. It's a dammed pond. It was just a place. I know I took 2 hours for a break there that day, just sitting there listening to the frogs and the birds and everything. I mean, the weather was just gorgeous going through there. It felt like a spring day. So we kept on trucking. There's a fire tire up through there that I was able to do a Blue Blaze trail up to it. But by doing the Blue Blaze trail, I ended up not getting to the shelter till later on in the evening. It was almost dark by the time I got to the shelter, but I did see an exceptional view from the fire tire. We left out of there, left out of that shelter, and was trucking on across. Seth, the second Seth, he ended up getting off at Hot Springs. He was going to go and visit with his son. And so Caps, Laura, and I, we trucked it on. Trucking across through there, we got all the way to come through Sam's Gap. And, of course, we hit Sam's Gap first thing that morning, and lo and behold, the Leapfrog Cafe was there with fresh grounds. So got some good, it was mid-morning, so we got some chicken noodle soup, and which really needed, it was a cold morning. It turned off cold during the night, and so was able to get some chicken noodle soup and got warmed up. He had a gas logs and everything there burning, and just got warmed up. Well, then we headed on over to, after that we got a late start, but we headed on over to Big Bald, and got up there, got everything set up in the shelter because it was cold and they was calling for some precipitation overnight. Well, it did end up leaving a trace amount of snow overnight, so we walked into that, you know, walked on in, and by the time we got to the lower elevation, there's no snow, so we made it into Irwin to Uncle Johnny's, where Caps was going to get off and see his girlfriend. So Kodak and I decided to go to Uncle Johnny's and spend the night, and then we ended up zeroing there for just to give Caps able to catch up with us. Well, we ended up zeroing, but the day that we went to pull out, The weather forecast was just for rain with a slight chance of snow in the higher elevations, but there's a bunch of other people at Uncle Johnny's, so they all left out that morning and we left out, but my pace was not there where it needed to be able to stay up with the ones that had went out. They was going to go over to Cherry Gap shelter or something like that. So anyway, as Kodak and I was walking, we made the decision just to go to Curly Maple because I didn't think I'd be able to get over the Cherry Gap, and we figured it'd be full by the time we got there, which by staying at the Curly Maple shelter, it was a good thing because if we hadn't have made it, we'd have got stuck in the storm system that was coming through. So we ended up leaving out the next morning. Gosh, it was cold. The temperature had dropped. So we ended up going out of Curly Maple. We crossed over the beauty spot, Unaka Mountain. Now, by the time we was going across Unaka Mountain, we was post holing in the snow. I mean, it was snowing. I met Almighty through there. He was hiking, doing a slack pack southbound through that section. And it was pretty rough. We went on made it to the shelter. I got to the shelter by 2 o'clock, which I huffed it across there. I didn't take no break. It was too cold to take a break that day. So I got to the shelter, and I was soaking wet. The frog togs had soaked through everything. So I got my down out and everything, got my clothes off, and just got in up underneath the covers just to get warmed up. Which worked out well. My clothes dried out overnight, but every one of our shoes froze and everything. I didn't think nothing about, putting them under. I'm glad that we decided to do the Nero out of town instead of trying to make it across the mountain in it. After we left Cherry Gap Shelter, we went from there over to it was cold all day, but by the time we got down to the foot of Roan Mountain, the snow had melted away basically and was going to the Roan High Knob shelter, which is known for it's the highest shelter on the AT. So we went up the mountain, and of course the higher we got, the more in the snow that we've got. So we ended up doing a night hike into the Roan High Knob shelter. We didn't get there till like 9 o'clock at night. We was crossing ice patches that had froze over. I mean, it was dangerous hiking, but we did get to the shelter. We had to sleep in the upper room, what I call the upper room, and it was a good night. There's a mouse got in my sleeping bag with me, but I got it out. And anyway, the next morning, the sun did come out. We hiked off the Roan in the snow, but going across the Roan Highlands, I tell everybody it was 70 and muddy. I saw a little bit of snow on the balds, but for the most part it melted away. But now you talk about the trail being muddy. There's a couple times through there that I took a fall. I know one time I was going down through there and I hit a mud slick, and when I did, I went plumb down the hill. There wasn't nothing stopping you, but luckily I was on the AT sliding and not offside the mountain. But anyway, the Roan Highlands was beautiful and 70 degrees. Now, like I say, the temperature was going to drop again that night, so we had made it over the 19E, and one of my good friends, she let us use her cabin in the mountain to kind of get dried off and get warmed back up and everything, so we was able to resupply over in Newland and everything. Once I had got over the 19E, we had got all of Georgia down and all of North Carolina down, and we was going in to finish Tennessee. Of course, when you cross over 19E, you're also knocking on the door of 400 miles, which is an accomplishment. We got dropped back off at the trailhead, and of course it was raining, sleeting, like a wintry mix, what we call down here in the south. and we trucked it on across the mountain. We saw, walked by the Elk River and saw the Mountaineer Falls. Another falls that a lot of people don't see is because they just track by it and don't pay no attention is because it's on the Blue Blaze, is the Jones Falls. And that's just a gorgeous place to see. So we did see the Jones Falls. Was able to see that on a clear day, or on a clearer day. It wasn't raining at the time when we saw it. We after we went to the past the Jones Falls, we ended up staying at the Dentist Cove Road, just at the little camping area right past there. Now the temperatures was still cold at nighttime, and I know I had got out of the hammock that morning. I was getting my stuff ready to walk out, and Kodak, she was there beside of a tree, and just looked like she was stunned, or just like she's in distress. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "It is so cold. I can't get my stuff done." So we helped her pack up some of her stuff and everything, get her water filtered, because I filtered mine the night before and then had slept with my water, and then she was filtering that morning, and it was just so cold going through there. We walked across to saw the Laurel Falls, which is an amazing falls, and you have to track beside of the river there for a little bit on the they have like a high water route and a low water route. We was able to do the low water route. So we tracked along beside of the river on the rocks and made it over toward Watauga Lake, across the mountain there to Watauga Lake. Walked around the Watauga Lake. It was a pretty warm day that day, and stayed right across the road, the Watauga Dam Road, at the little camping site there. We did have a fire that night, had a little fire, and slept very well. After we had left from leaving out of the Watauga Dam Road, you can't camp around Watauga Lake because of the bears and the threat that they have to the humans and the food and everything. So anyway, after we left from there, we hiked up the mountain to past that Van de Veter shelter, and took a long break there. I mean, it had warmed up, the weather was nice, sun was out, so took a little bit of long break there. Was able to just catch some rays of sun, and then started walking down the mountain. The next morning we had got up. Now there was some deer at our shelter when we first got up. There was some deer at the shelter and everything, and it's like they're so used to human beings. They was coming right up to the shelter entrance just about it. So got us some good photos of that. I think that's the closest, besides the goats up in Parisburg, that I was able to get to any of the wildlife. But anyway, we left out that morning. It was supposed to rain, and got out through there, but by noon it was pouring the rain. So we ended up stopping at a shelter, and because we was all soaking wet, so we stopped at the shelter, and actually we slept the rest of the day. And then about 6 o'clock, when the rain had stopped, we put all of our stuff up and headed out, because we was wanting to go to Damascus and get breakfast first thing that morning. So we hiked out at 6 o'clock that evening, and hiked up to about midnight, found a stealth spot, and then got up at 5 in the morning and done the rest of the mileage in the town, finishing Tennessee and crossing over into the Virginia border, so that we could get breakfast in Damascus. When we got into Damascus, we stayed at the Broken Fiddle hostel, which I absolutely enjoyed, and had a real good time there. Got a good resupply and got some stuff done in town. After Damascus, we headed back out on the trail, and there was a storm system coming out, so we decided to do, I think it was like 20 miles or something. It's to the second shelter out of Damascus. But we decided to go to the second shelter so that we could, because was planning on going because we was going to have to go across White Top Mountain and then going to the Grayson Highlands. So we was going to try to beat the system basically coming in. But it never did do what the weather had forecasted, so we went across White Top Mountain. It was windy up there, but got some beautiful views, and then, got into the Grayson Highlands. Stayed at the Thomas Knob shelter there in the Grayson Highlands. The next morning, we crossed the big 500 miles. Saw some horses, the little ponies that's there. And it was just absolutely gorgeous going through there. The scenery, the weather, it kind of reminded me of the Dolly Sods in a way. After we got done with going through the Grayson Highlands, we ended up getting some trail magic through there and everything. And after the Grayson Highlands, we headed toward the Partnership Shelter. And I will tell you this, I've never been so disappointed in my life. It seems like the only time when we'd head into town, it was on a Monday or something like that. Well, at Partnership Shelter, they don't deliver pizza on Mondays, or Chinese or anything else. So that kind of got me right there. But we stayed at the Partnership Shelter. And then the next day we hiked on across and done the alpaca farm. And that was really fun. That lady, she said, if you can be here by 2 o'clock, I'll give you a tour of the farm. And we booked it across the mountain. But it was really neat seeing the alpacas and everything. We stayed the night there, ate at the Mexican restaurant and everything. That was in Marion, Virginia. And then left out of there, and of course, started our way on up north. As we trucked along, right after we left out of Marion, Virginia, we did end up passing the quarter way mark, so we was a quarter of the way to Maine. After Marion, our next resupply point was Bland, Virginia. Bland, Virginia is very bland. I think if it's a restaurant, I think it's been burned down or closed down. One or the other caught on fire. We stayed at the Big Walker Motel in there, but just overnight. We did have a shuttle driver that picked us up, and he is a nice guy, real good to talk to, and everything going down now. He left a lasting impression on me, that's for sure. We trucked on along. Virginia's the longest state that you have to go to on the AT, so you got 500 miles that you go through. So as you was going along, springtime was coming. You started seeing more flowers and everything else. Started seeing the trees kind of bud out some and everything. So it was really nice seeing all of that. After Bland, Virginia, we got up to the Wapiti shelter, the second one. The first one, there's a murder back in the 80s at it, so it was on the Ribble Trail, which was the original AT. So they tore that shelter down and then rebuilt the Wapiti shelter on the AT now. So they, instead of doing 2 miles across through there on the river trail, you got to do 7 miles around now. But it was some pretty scenery taking you to the top of the mountain and everything. When we got to in close to Parisburg, my wife, she came up, and I switched out my winter gear to my summer gear, and sent that back home with her. Ended up staying in a hotel over the mountain from Parisburg. We was going to stay in Parisburg, but the hotel we was going to stay at was sold out, and a local resident had recommended us not staying at that hotel, and we didn't stay at the Angels Rest Hostel. My wife had come up. So anyway, and then we went into Blacksburg, Virginia, took a zero, went into Blacksburg, Virginia and stuff. So it was a really good day. And one of the locals in Parisburg, he's a really nice guy. He ended up buying our supper for us at the Chinese restaurant, which was really good. After we left Parisburg, went up, crossed over the mountain. Now you're looking over toward into West Virginia and everything, so at the top of the mountain, so you're looking over into West Virginia. Beautiful views. We did walk across that ridge line there, and the goats was up there, and they were very active. If you stopped, they wanted to lick the salt off of you and everything. Now, we didn't have much trouble with them like some of the other people said, but now we didn't try to camp in their territory either. We hiked on across to the Warspur shelter. We kept on, knocking out blazes as we went. We was just hauling along as we could. We started, after we had passed the Warspur shelter and everything, started trucking through there. We come up on where we was going up to the Dragon's Tooth. Now, before you get to the Dragon's Tooth, there's a lot of fencing and stuff, stone fencing that was put there back in the 1800s and stuff. That's just amazing to me how it was built. Going up to Dragon's Tooth, it was going up. You had a little bit some rock scrabbles that you had to do, but going up in the evening, the sun was in my eyes, and I couldn't really see. And they had done some trail maintenance, and they had cut this tree limb off. So the rest of the limb was hanging out. Well, I was trying to see what I was doing. I had my right eye closed because the sun was in it, and I swung out, and when I did, I hit that right square in the temple, and it hurt. I'll tell you what, I ain't never had nothing hurt as bad as what that did. So after a few minutes and I got my senses together, I was done with that part of the mountain. I was not impressed with the Dragon's Tooth, just because that had ruined my day. Now, going off of the Dragon's Tooth is a little bit technical, and I feel sorry for anybody that would have to climb it up that way, because it is kind of a technical thing to do. We camped at the bottom of the Dragon's Tooth that night. Now, there was coyotes and whippoorwills and owls and stuff. We heard all those. The next day, we done McAfee Knob. Saw a stunning sunset there and a beautiful sunrise. Just gorgeous. But McAfee Knob to me is overrated. I like the cliffs thereafter, the Tinker Cliffs. I thought that cliff walk was just amazing. I really enjoyed that. After we had done the Tinker Cliffs and everything, by then we had got into Daleville, Virginia. Nice little town. I liked it and everything. And then after we'd moved out of Daleville, Virginia, I stayed at the Full Hard Shelter at the top of the mountain. Used to be an old fire tire up there, but I'll tell you what surprised me the most about it, when I was at the tower, if they'd had the trees cleaned off there, airplanes was coming in. I guess it was in the Blacksburg airport. The airplanes was coming in, and you could just about look in the windows and see those passengers in the windows the way they was coming in around that mountain. That just amazed the far out of me. Really enjoyed being at that shelter that night. And their water system that they had there for water collection, they collected rainwater because there wasn't no spring. So the water would run off the roof, and they had it go down into a pipe and then into a little concrete cistern, and was able to collect the water. And just amazing, just very amazing. Like I say, we kept on hauling it through Virginia, went across the James River footbridge, stopped at a couple stores that was close by to the trail, and everything. Now, in Glasgow, come in after we crossed the James River footbridge, my wife had to bring my backpack, another backpack to me, because my other backpack had messed up and it was just causing some issues. So she met us at the James River footbridge, and we went and stayed. We didn't stay in Glasgow, we stayed the next town over at the Pink Cadillac restaurant, hotel, whatever. Very good place to stay at, and that Pink Cadillac restaurant really knows how to throw the food down. We ended up hiking over the mountain, Punch Bowl Mountain, and of course, by then you're doing, trying to get over toward Three Ridges and all that, because you're making your attack on Shenandoah National Park. You pass the Priest Shelter. I don't really have nothing big to say about the Priest Shelter or anything. I know the privy's full, but now it was packed out that night. Now, I had met Cup of Tea. I met Frizzle for the first time at McAfee Knob, and then Cup of Tea, I had met her around Woods Hole, around that area, around the Ribble Trail and all that. But then Bearded Frog, I met him coming off of Punch Bowl Mountain, and then he stayed at the Priest. So that was the first time that I had really talked to Bearded Frog. After the Priest Shelter, went over Three Ridges, and then we ended up taking a 00 at the Reed's Gap. We got off Reed's Gap there and took a 00 there, resupplied. And, well, done a Nero and a 0, kind of, because did do some hiking on the Blue Ridge Parkway. That was the AT related. And then done a resupply, and they done, Caps and Kodak done some gear changes. Now, after we left Reed's Gap and went into the park, Shenandoah Park was nice. Now, like I say, you've got, it's very tourist orientated and everything. Now, we went through the waysides, basically was closed and everything, but and I didn't go into Waynesboro or anything like that. Well, I did go get some KFC in Waynesboro from Reed's Gap, via Reed's Gap. But anyway, when we did get into Shenandoah, I had got ahead, and then Kodak had stayed at her parents' house a little bit longer, and then Caps, he is behind me, and we was trying to we'd stayed together, but then some differences with some scheduling and some places I didn't want to go as far as eating places, because I think I stopped at every one of them waysides at the store. And by the time the end of the Skyline Drive, I was just ready to get out of there. I will say that at the hut, at the Gravel Springs hut, you had a rat called Annabelle. And she was very hospitable when I stayed there. You could hear her gnawing at nighttime, but she didn't say nothing to us about, disturbing her or anything. Now, some people say she'd run the rafters and everything, and we didn't have that. But she was very hospitable for us. But anyway, I ended up hiking out of the Shenandoahs with a lady called Pigpen, and I started picking my miles up. I kind of had a timeline that I had to do, so I needed to pick my mileage up from what we'd been doing. So anyway, so we started hiking out. Now I will tell you this, when you're doing 25 miles back to back and you're not used to it, that will put a hurting on you, but it worked out. I really enjoyed, the time that I was hiking with Pigpen, and we had some fun. Of course, we did do the roller coaster. They do need to put a sign up on there that you may get wet for this ride. Now, it did rain while we was on the roller coaster, so we done half the roller coaster one day and the other half the next, just because it was pouring the rain, and we'd got off into the shelter during that time on the roller coaster. We crossed the Virginia into West Virginia, and then, went into Harper's Ferry. I was number 93 when I got to Harper's Ferry. I left at Springer. I was number 143. I stayed in Harper's Ferry for a night, and I think that was my favorite section, one of my favorite sections, besides the North Carolina part. Walking from Harper's Ferry to southern Pennsylvania, you follow a lot of the Civil War trails. Across through there, and the history that's with that is amazing. So anyway, that was one of my favorite sections. Got to see the Amtrak come through Harper's Ferry and read a lot of the signs. After we'd left out of Harper's Ferry, went into Maryland, crossed over into Maryland, and then, made our way north, went to the, passed by the, a lot of just historical places that, they're all included in the other videos and stuff. Really had a lot of fun through that section. Got into southern Pennsylvania, and going between Harper's Ferry and Pennsylvania, that was my biggest day hiking on the AT. I done 26 miles in one day. Just, it was flat, and you could haul it out. When I got into southern PA, it was beautiful rolling farmland, a lot of Amish type country, a lot of Amish little farm stands and everything that was on the side of the road. They it was beautiful country. It was beautiful country, but it's flatter. Now, northern PA, which I'm going to say started probably, let's see, I like Port Clinton. I'm going to say probably after the 501 shelter. Well, you started getting into rocks right before the 501 shelter, but after the 501 shelter, they started really getting bad. So after that, it was just rocky, those little rocks that you was walking across the whole entire time, and they just would get big, small, and they're so close together. So that was basically northern PA. Now, there was good, and by the time, I'll tell you what, by the time I got to Maine in the rain and the mud, I was wishing I had southern PA back. But for what I had at the time, southern PA was the hardest I had been through. Went into some nice little towns like Port Clinton area. I love that little town. Went to the AAA family restaurant there, and it was really good. Bowling Springs, PA, I liked it. Done the I didn't do the half-gallon challenge at, I didn't want to ruin my taste for ice cream, so I just done a pint of ice cream. They didn't have strawberries, so anyway, I just done a pint of vanilla and everything at Furnace, at Pine Grove Furnace in PA. Duncannon, PA. I didn't spend the night there. I just done a real quick in-town resupply laundry and charged my phones up, and then I hiked out. I had to wait for about an hour for the train to get started so we could cross the railroad tracks going across through there. But Duncannon, that is all right town. I didn't stay there or anything like that. Met a lot of nice people. I did hike out after Duncannon. There's a Blue Blaze trail that I kept seeing something pop up that said the General. I'm like, what in the world's the General? So I hiked like a mile out this Blue Blaze trail, and it was an old steam shovel that was sitting out there that they had used in the mining of coal and everything. So that was pretty neat. I guess you're wondering, I showed you lights last night and a picture of the trail. Lord have mercy. I got to the shelter last night, and I was going down to the spring, and the spring was a quarter of a mile from the shelter, and I saw this huge, humongous tent pitched with a tarp over it and solar panels outside of it. And there's an older guy, probably in his early 70s, had a little gut, sitting out there by a fire and using a box, as a table to eat his food that he'd just fixed in his frying pan off the fire. And I walked up, I said, is this the way to the spring? He said, yeah, but it's a long ways down there. He said, it's a long ways down there. And he said, I got some water if you want some to get you through the night. And I said, I'd love to have some. So anyway, we got talking. I said, Lord have mercy. I said, you got solar panels? He said, oh, come here and look at this. He had a TV in there, a little TV he could watch. I said, do you get reception up here? He said, well, I watch movies on it. And he had a big old Coleman air mattress with the supports up underneath of it and that thing, screened in porch on his tent. And I said, my gosh. I said, are you vacationing? He said, well, he said, I do this about every year. He said, it took me 18 hours to go 2 miles. He had a wagon in there with rubber wheels that he was using for a table for his TV, DVD player thing. And he said, I put it all in that wagon. I had my backpack on with my food, had his ice cooler in his wagon. He said, it took me 18 hours to get up here. But he said, I'm up here. He said, I was going to camp for a couple days and then I'm going back to the house. And I said, well, that's one way of doing it. I said, my gosh. I said, well, at least you won't have to go for a stress test. I said, because if you drug all that up through here, you passed your stress test. I said, I'd have had a heart attack. He said, oh, it was hard. He said, I'd station stuff here and there up trail and I'd walk back and get it. And then I'd go get a little bit more. We talked for a little bit. He's a pretty good old feller. Just wanting to get out and camp a little bit. And I first met Captain Chaos at the George Washington Vandalier or something shelter. It's right before Lehigh Gap. I had got to the shelter and he was walking with Cup of Tea and Frizzle. So anyhow, he had started, all of us started about the same time or the same week, just on different days. So anyway, I met him at that shelter. We all left out the next morning. It seemed like we all had about the same, was going to the same place the next day. So we ended up leaving from there, climbed out you had to go across Lehigh Gap. And of course, it is beautiful up there where they've done all the molten and the everything from the I guess it's from the coal or whatever this mining operation. It, just wore it. The acid and stuff had just wore down the top of the mountain. So they've made great strides at getting that back to the pre-state to where it looks good. Very beautiful. It was kind of like he's walking on top of the plateau, but you did have to do some climbing up out of Lehigh Gap. It was fun. It was a rock scramble, but it was fun climbing up out of there. I had been walking, before I started walking with him, I had been walking by myself. Pigpen had got off trail. She was going to go attend her high school graduation. Really enjoyed walking with her, but I just advanced on by myself ever since about the 501 shelter, somewhere around in there. My shoes, by the time I had was getting done with Pennsylvania's, my shoes was wore completely out. I was about afraid that the soles was going to come out. So I had got up early, about 4 o'clock in the morning. I was going to do a 20-mile day into Delaware Water Gap, see if I could get me some more shoes. I was having some trouble getting them sent to me. I found out that REI wouldn't do a 2-day delivery or overnight delivery to a post office, and I was having some trouble with getting some mail drops. So anyway, I called the shoe store and asked them if they had any 14 wide, and of course they didn't. They didn't even have nothing in 14. But anyway, I called everywhere else trying to find something that size and couldn't find anything. So after I said a quick prayer and everything, I was like, I just didn't know what to do. I called them back and I said, do you have anything? And she said, well, I've got a 13 wide. And she said, you might be able to wear that with a thin sock. So I just told her to put them on hold. I asked her, I said, can you put those on hold for me? I'll be in the town this evening to get them. And those did work with a thin sock. I was able to wear them. Now my toes was right at the end of the shoe, but I wore those for a couple 100 miles until I could get my new shoes that I had ordered, and I just had them sent to the house until my lovely wife Amanda could get them sent to me at a place. So anyway, once we hiked out of Delaware Water Gap, we crossed over into New Jersey, which was a great feeling. Now, the rocks don't stop at Delaware Water Gap, but, it makes you feel like they do. First met I'd met Pace and Deceiver in Daleville, but started hiking with Pace and Deceiver and Bearded Frog and Frizzle and, of course, Captain Chaos and Cup of Tea. We just all basically hiked out at some point of the Delaware Water Gap. Got to Sunfish Pond and was taking a lunch. Pace and Deceiver come up and said, they're about 150 yards behind you. There's some bears up in a tree. We didn't know it. We was just eating lunch. We never even saw them or anything, but it was gorgeous going around the Sunfish Pond and hiking on. Now, New Jersey, going through New Jersey, it's a nice state. Did visit a lot of the delis between New Jersey and New York. I think that was really fun. Just about every day you was able to stop, get a deli sandwich, or stop and take a break. We was doing higher mile days and then stopping for lunch and having an extended lunch period. There's a couple little swimming areas you could swim in. I know I used my Thermarest several times when I was swimming. It was great walking through there. Went into several towns like Paulin. I believe that was in New York. Went to Warwick to the movie theater. Ended up having to camp on the ground at the Warwick theater. There wasn't no place to string my hammock up, but that worked out well. I did fall asleep before the movie even got started, but it was real fun through there. Unionville, New York, I believe, was my most favorite town in New York. It just, to me, it seemed like small town America. We ended up sleeping at the city park in Unionville. I camped on the ground. All the trees that's in that park is all memorial trees, so they ask that you don't hang a hammock from them or anything else. So I gladly respected that. Very beautiful area. Went up, I can't remember what mountain it was, but went up on one of them. There's an American flag painted on the rocks. Very patriotic. I love what the towns up in that area do. Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, even on up. They respect their fallen soldiers, their war heroes and stuff. They'll put their pictures up on like a little flag and the banner and hang them from the light post and stuff. I do like that. When we did cross over into New York, I know it was raining that hard that day. We had to go across several rocky, bald-face areas. Now, that's the first time that I met Pickleberry and Shiny Penny. They was from North Carolina. The feeling I got just hiking with somebody that was from the same area that I was from. Now, I really got a good feeling from that. That boosted my day, walking in the rain that day, just talking and, finding out what was going on around home and everything. I really enjoyed that. Went into Lake Glenwood or Glenwood Lake and stayed at a hostel there. Really great stay. Beautiful little area. And it is raining through there. But I like that section through there. Like I say, going with the delis and everything. He ended up going through Connecticut through that section also, and I'm probably getting the order of the states all wrong, but Connecticut, we did stop at several of the delis and everything. Now, I resupplied before Connecticut and then resupplied after Connecticut. I didn't have to really stop going through Connecticut. I did stop at the delis and some of the gas stations, but didn't have to. We ended up the Bear Mountain Zoo. That was now, a lot of people don't like the zoo. It's the lowest point on the AT, and going across Bear Mountain, it was just gorgeous day and everything. You could see the city from the top of Bear Mountain and everything in New York. But anyway, going through the zoo, a lot of people, you don't like caged animals, and they do look sad inside the cages. But if you read on the history of the zoo and everything, it's all rehabilitated animals. It's all rehabilitated animals. And in New York, once they're rehabilitated, you can't set them back out into the wild. So they're in the zoo, and they're there for, your viewing pleasure. They had a couple bears, some wolves, turkey, a little beaver. It only costed a couple dollars to get into it. Neat little thing to see. Now, above the zoo, they did have a vulture hanging above the zoo, and that's what keeps other vultures from coming in, and they said roosting on the over the bears lot and everything, which was pretty neat. We had I know as we was hiking out, going up, it was a real steep climb coming out of the Bear Mountain Zoo. There's old vulture up there. It was a squawking and everything. It was hot that day, and I was like, Lord, I'm near death. Them vultures is already circling me. But anyway, I hollered up there, and I said, y'all better stay away from that parkway over there, or one of them interstates. I said, the New York DOT's got a contract. Y'all get hit, you're going to be hanging over that zoo over yonder. Bearded Frog heard me, and he said, are you talking to them buzzards? And I said, I'm just shooting out a warning to them. I said, they're over here trying to get my corpse because they think I'm dying climbing this hill. But I'm just shooting out a warning to them. But, I've kind of got, I know, by the time I'd got past the Shenandoahs and everything, my hiker legs had come in, and we was able to do bigger miles, do some climbs and everything. So coming out of the Bear Mountain Zoo, it didn't take no time. Now crossing the Hudson, that bridge, it was really great to see that. It's just gorgeous. A lot of history in the area. There's some Revolutionary forts and stuff. I think that section, those was some of the longer sections in between hostel. Well, we was going to hostels, but it was like once a week, and some of the places we was taking, showers at was either in lakes or, just kind of washing off in the lakes, or going to some of the, like we went to that Graymore Spiritual Life Center, which was at a monastery, but that was the Bear Mountain day. We went to that monastery and was able to stay down at the football or the little baseball diamond that they've got down there, and of course took a cold shower down there. I think that's some of the longest stretches where we was in town every day, but we didn't get a hostel stay or a bed. Slept in our hammocks, tents, whatever we had going through. I will say it was dry through there while we was walking through. It was very dry. A lot of the fire tires was in use. The states had implemented that, just trying to cut down on the big forest fire being started. The Canadian wildfires had started, and I really do believe they affected the weather somehow, because it was very dry going through these sections. Of course, you couldn't do a fire or anything, outside fire or nothing like that, but I enjoyed it, really did. When we hit Vermont, it was like somebody had turned on the sprinkler system. It seemed like we had more wet days than what we did have dry days in Vermont. Of course, by the time we got back up to Vermont, we had been walking through a lot of the more or less elevation gains through the day, and was really, able to throw out some larger miles. But when we got to Vermont, the mountains started coming back. You had to, you went over Mount Killington and some of those mountains, and down in the south we're used to switchbacks going up, where the further up north you got, they took you straight up and over the mountain, and every now and again they'd throw in a switchback. So anyway, Vermont, you had to take a lesson on that. But Vermont was a beautiful state going through. It was very green. I know there's some beautiful lakes, fields, rolling hills. It was still beautiful country, but you had to climb straight in there. So we had to start cutting back our mileage to go through. Now, a lot of times they call Vermont Vermud, and I don't think there was a lot of mud in Vermont. They said we had missed the mud season. Now, there was some plank walks and stuff, but I think New Hampshire and Maine was far more muddier than what Vermont was. When we had, we started in February to try to get ahead of the bubbles, so when we got to Harper's Ferry, we got into a bubble of the flip-floppers, and then when we started in Vermont, we had passed that bubble out of Harper's Ferry. We'd got ahead of that, but when we started in Vermont, we got into another bubble, the Vermont Long Trail people. So we met a lot of different people during that time, also doing the Long Trail through Vermont. As we was traveling along, I guess we had to start going through across like Mount Moosilauke and the Killingtons, which was major mountains Now, there's several trails to get to the top of Moosalok, and there was, of course, Dartmouth College was having a reunion the weekend that we was there, so there's a lot of Dartmouth students up on top of Moosalok when we come through, and we was able to summit that day in a gorgeous day. There was a lot of climbing going up through there. Now, the next day we done the Killingtons, and we done that in the pouring rain. But not no good views, and it was just about hand over hand at some point. So those two mountains was to show us what was to come as we was knocking down miles toward the Whites. We got to the Notch Hostel after we'd done the Killingtons. We got picked up at the trailhead, and I went into town and got a resupply, and I'm gonna say they stuck us out in the woodshed. It was a little tiny house type shed thing, and I mean it was nice enough, but they put me on a cot because it was meant for two people, so there's three of us staying in it. So anyway, I was on that cot, and the cot during the night ended up, the legs fell off of it or done something or other, and I couldn't get it back together, so I ended up sleeping on the floor. So I really didn't get a good night's sleep that night. So then the next morning it was still raining and everything, so we got dropped back off at the trailhead, and so we done Franconia Ridge, and that, I think that was mentally, that was probably the worst day that I had on trail. I was going up through there, and I was doing a stream crossing. I ended up falling in the stream. I dropped my phone in the stream. And then as we was climbing the mountain, we got up on Franconia Ridge, and I had my rain poncho. I didn't have a raincoat, so it was cold up on top. It was about 30 degrees, so I put on my layers that I had, and I had bought a fleece liner back at one of the hostels, so I put it on, and I had on my poncho, and I was going across through there, and it wasn't doing no kind of rain protection. It looked more like a big yaller sail going across through there. I mean, we had 20-30 mile per hour wind gust going across through there, and it was cold and rain pelting at you and everything else, and you was trying to do, you was above tree line, and you couldn't see nothing, so you was going across all those little mountains. Now, once we come off the tree line and I got to the, I think the Garfield shelter, I got everything dried out and everything, and I was dried out the next morning, but I know mentally I was just fussing, and just, I didn't like New Hampshire at that time. It just was not what I was thinking that it would do. Now, going on through, once we got through Garfield, we had good weather going through the rest of the Whites and the Presidentials. I mean, had gorgeous views and everything. Going down to the huts, we got to partake, doing the, getting the soup and the breads and the sweets and the stuff. Was able to partake with that. Ended up staying in the dungeon at the Lake of the Clouds. I always aggravate them, and I say I slept the best at the Lake of the Clouds in the dungeons. I said it was 5-star compared to the Notch where I'd stayed at, because I'd had to sleep on the floor. But I was just wore out that day, and I slept really good. The Lake of the Cloud huts was really nice. Now, the track up to Mount Washington, I really thought I'd done something. I mean, we had, we'd started at Springer Mountain, tracked up the Klingman's Dome, which was the highest mountain on the AT, and then went from Klingman's Dome down to Bear Mountain Zoo, which is the lowest point on the AT, and then we made it back up to Mount Washington, which was the highest point in the northern part on the AT. So got up there, got our pictures done early at the sign and everything, and we waited around. Well, they got this cog system train that comes up through there, and, well, it was just amazing to me. All these people got off the train at 9 o'clock, with their backpacks on and their hiking boots and everything else, and they walk 100 yards to the sign to get their picture took. And here we'd walked from Georgia. So, but when I got to Mount Washington, I felt accomplished. I was like, man, I've walked from Georgia all the way to here. I was starting to get pumped up and everything for what was to come. Had a really going off of the all the presidentials, went across the Wildcats and all those mountains, like straight up and over, straight up and over. I know several times through. I know going across the Wildcats, or the Carters, I'd stopped at the Carter Hut, ate me some lunch or a midday snack, and then I got halfway up to Carter, and I was like, man, I'm still hungry. And I ate me another lunch, stretched out for about an hour and a half, took me a nap, and waited for some people to catch up with me. I had, because I'd walked a little bit further the day before, so I'd got ahead of them. But ended up meeting with Grateful, or he met me on trail, and I ended up walking the rest of the day with him, just talking and walking. It was an awesome day. But really done real good going through there. And then when we got to Gorham, I lost one of my trekking poles doing the river crossing there right before Gorham, New Hampshire. So we had the Barn Hostel pick us up. We was going to stay there. And man, that guy, he picked us up in a sweet 1988 Cadillac Brougham. I mean, that was the most comfortablest seat I had sat in a while. And then, I mean, those plush leather seats, it was a good riding car. Well, then when we got there, we had a double bed, any double bed we could choose from. I mean, really great stay at the hostel. I really enjoyed it. Then the next day, we actually zeroed there, and then was going to head out the following day. Well, from the time that we left out of Gorham, it rained. It just started raining. We had planned out a track, what we was going to do to get up through the Mahoosic Notch and the Arm, but we couldn't do it. We had to back our mileage down because of the rain. I mean, we was walking in ankle-deep water. So, I know going through the Mahoosic Notch and the Arm, of course, there was ice and stuff down in the bottom of it still. We went through it in the mist and drizzling rain, and we ended up wading in water because the trail was flooded going through there, or on the other side of it. So, and the campsite in the middle, it was flooded out. So we had to change some of our plans around doing that. That whole time through there, it just rained every day. So we ended up staying, getting off. We went into the Human Nature Hostel, which is a very relaxing place to stay at. Really nice people running it and everything else. Now, like I say, the guy, he was fixing the food and everything else, and I did partake of the food. It just was not as, I'm not a vegan or a vegetarian type person, so the food was not as fulfilling to me as what I think it would have been for somebody that enjoys that type of food. But I ended up leaving out of there, and then after we left the Human Nature Hostel, we ended up hiking over to another road, and then we stayed at one of the lakes with one of Bearded Frog's friends, and that was really enjoyable. That was around the 4th, and got to really enjoy the 4th of July, some fireworks and everything. It was me and Chaos and Frog. The others they was with some other friends, so we'd kind of split up for a little bit. By the time we got over to Stratton, it was the 4th of July, and we had got back with our group, and we'd stayed at the Roadhouse Hostel. it was really nice to be able to be in that area. The roadhouse in Austin was really great. That woman bent over backwards for us. Now, after we left out of the Roadhouse Hostel, we went across the Baldipates, which we had perfect weather going through them. And I think that's probably my favorite part of Maine, except for when I got to leave after I summited Katahdin. I was not a Maine. I think if I would have entered Maine when it wasn't in the middle of rain and from the time you'd get out of your hammock to the time you got back in, the mosquitoes biting you, and then it just raining every day, or either the mosquitoes, I think that I would have felt differently about it. Now the views was beautiful in Maine. You couldn't ask for no better views. Now some of them was hazy. I blame the Canadian wildfires for that, but the views was amazing. The Baldipates really, I was stunned by what I'd seen. It was just a day with gorgeous views. I think that was the best day that I had while in Maine. The rest of the time, it was just very hazy and everything. Even when we went across the mountain range that you could see Katahdin for the first time, we didn't get a real good view of Katahdin because it was so hazy in the background and everything. And that was in the 100-mile wilderness. After the Baldipates, we went through there, and then we did end up going to Shaw's and took a zero and everything. We was kind of slowing down. Our mileage, we had let it drop going through the presidentials, and our time on the trail was almost over. So we did slow down some and was just trying to, enjoy what we had left. Now, Shaw's was a great place. I know right before there was a lot of rain, and we did have some tricky river crossings to go across, but we was able to go across the rivers without having the blue blaze around them. Shaw's was a great place to stay at. He really knows his gears. I know my shoes. I had got new shoes in Gorham, but then I split the side out of them right before I got to Shaw's, and he was able to. I ended up switching over to some Ultras just to finish up the trek with. I had been hiking in Hoka's, but it was great. Once we got into the 100-mile wilderness, or once I got into the 100-mile wilderness, the first part of the wilderness is very hilly and mountainous. It rained off and on through there. I didn't like the 100-mile wilderness. The mosquitoes was bad. It rained. It was misty and everything. So, anyway, we hit it hard, was going through there. Now, we had planned for 6 days, ended up doing it in 5. We went through there. The second part of it is flat, basically. I mean, it's not all flat, but, it's a lot flatter than what it was in the beginning. You still got your mud bogs and everything else. By the time we got through the wilderness, got over to A-Ball Bridge, I was ready to hit Katahdin. We stayed at the A-Ball campground, saw the bald eagle's nest. Lord have mercy. That was the most exciting thing that I'd seen on trail. I didn't see no moose. I didn't see no bear or anything. So it was a very exciting thing that I had seen on trail. And it was surreal because it was coming down to our last nights on trail. After I left A-Ball campground, I went to the hike to the Birches, and I was anxious the next morning. I left the campsite at 5:30 in the morning, At 9 o'clock on the 17th, I summited Mount Katahdin and was able to touch the sign that I had so longed to see. I done a lot of as I hiked the mountain by myself. It was raining at the bottom, and then by the time we got to the top, it was fogged in. But that was just the goal that I wanted to make. I can't really explain what I was feeling when I got up there, but I was just overwhelmed. But I also was glad that it was done. I was glad that it was done. I was ready to go home. I knew my family was waiting at the bottom of the mountain, so I ended up, I stayed up there for a little bit, and I started getting cold because I got wet, hiking up the mountain. And anyway, I started hiking back down, and I think the most joyous moment was when I saw my wife and my dad waiting on me at the bottom of the mountain. I hadn't seen them in 5 months. So, anyway, that was my track from Springer Mountain, Georgia to Mount Katahdin. I had a lot of good days, and I did have some bad days. I had some mentally challenging days that I just had to overcome. But this trip, I think I got out of it what I needed to get out of it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.